This is my second video and the topic I chose is bills of exchange. In this video, I will talk about the bills of exchange and how the bills of exchange is used in a trading transactions. So let's begin with the definition of bills of exchange. As you know, goods can be sold or bought for cash or on credit. When goods are sold or bought for cash, payment is received immediately. On the other hand, when goods are sold or bought on credit, the payment is deferred to a future date. In such a situation, normally the firm relies on the party to make payment on the due date, but in some cases, to avoid any possibility of delay or default, an instrument of credit is used through which the buyer assures the seller that the payment shall be made according to the agreed condition. So that is the definition in the layman term. But the bills of exchange is basically governed by the Negotiable Instrument Act 1881. So according to the Negotiable Instrument Act 1881, a bills of exchange is defined as an instrument in writing containing an unconditional order signed by the maker directing a certain person to pay a certain sum of money only to or to the order of a certain person or to the bearer of the instrument. The following feature of a bills of exchange emerged out of this definition. So basically there is a certain requirement which has laid down in the Negotiable Instrument Act 1881 in order to enforce that bills of exchange in a court of law. So what are the basic features? I'll talk about the basic feature. A bills of exchange must be in writing. First of all, this must be in writing. It should not be oral in nature. It is an order to make payment. It's an order to make payment. The order to make payment is unconditional. There should not be any condition attached to the order that if that will be done, then only I'll be paying certain thing like that. There should not be any condition associated with the order. The maker of the bills of exchange must sign it. The payment to be made must be certain. The payment should be certain. It should not be uncertain, right? It should be clearly mentioned in the bills of exchange. The date on which the payment is made must be certain. The date must be certain so that the due date can be identified. The bills of exchange must be payable to a certain person. The amount mentioned in the bills of exchange is payable either on demand or on the expiry of fixed term of time. It must be stamped as per the requirement of law. So these are the basic features of the bills of exchange as mentioned in the Negotiable Instrument Act. A bills of exchange is generally drawn by the creditor upon his debtor. It has to be accepted by the drawee or someone on his behalf. This must be accepted by the debtor before it can be called as a bills of exchange. So for example, if a seller A is drawing a bill on purchaser B, and the purchaser B is not accepting the bill, that will not be called as a bills of exchange because it's not accepted by the drawee. So the acceptance is very much required before it can be called as a bills of exchange. Okay. Now I'll put one example so that it will clarify to you what is bills of exchange. So for example, A sold goods to B on credit for 50,000 for 3 months. To ensure payment on a due date, A draws a bills of exchange upon B for rupees 50,000 payable after 3 months. Before it is accepted by B, it will be called a draft. As I said in my previous slide, that in order to be legally called as a bills of exchange, it must be accepted by the drawee. Yeah. So because till the time it is not accepted, it will be called as a draft. It will become bills of exchange only when B writes the word accepted. As I mentioned, acceptance is very much required, and appended his signature there to communicate his acceptance. So the communication of his acceptance is very much required. So when the bills of exchange is drawn by the seller to the purchaser, it will be called as a draft, and once it is accepted by the purchaser, then it will be called as a bills of exchange. Yeah. So there are certain parties involved in the bills of exchange related transactions. So I'll talk about the various parties involved. Yeah. So first of all, the drawer. And who is a drawer? Drawer is basically a maker who is drawing a bill, or the seller in a layman term. Yeah. The second important party is the drawee. Who is drawee? drawees on whom bill is drawn, that is a purchaser. The third party is payee. Who is payee? Payee is a person to whom payment is made. In a normal circumstances, the drawer should be a payee, but in some special cases, the drawer and payee may be a different person, because in a situation of discounting and endorsement of the bills of exchange, the payee would be different from the drawer. I'll talk about in my next slide different terminology like discounting and endorsement. Yeah. So let's move on to the next slide. Okay. Uh, the next negotiable instrument act is promissory note. And what is promissory note? According to the Negotiable Instrument Act 1881, again, this promissory note is a negotiable instrument which is governed by the Negotiable Instrument Act 1881. So this act you need to be remembering every time. So according to this act, a promissory note is defined as an instrument in writing. Again, this instrument should be in writing. It should not be in oral. And not being a banknote or a currency note. So this is a very important term, because this should not be, because banknote or a currency note is also a promissory note issued by the government of India, and this can be issued only by the government, and no other individual can issue a banknote or a currency note, which is a form of a promissory note. Yeah. So this promissory note should containing an unconditional undertaking signed by the maker. So in the earlier bills of exchange, there was an unconditional order to make the money, but in the promissory note, there is an unconditional undertaking signed by the maker to pay a certain sum of money only to or to the order of a certain person or to the bearer of the instrument. So as I said, so if you issue a promissory note which is payable to a bearer of the instrument, that will be called as a banknote or a currency note, and accordingly, this promissory note payable to a bearer is illegal, because this can only be issued by the government of India. So therefore, a promissory note cannot be made payable to the bearer. Yeah. So it cannot be a payable to bearer. So if I compare the bills of exchange with the promissory note, bills of exchange is basically drawn by a seller to the purchaser, and it should containing the unconditional order to pay. Likewise, in the promissory note, it's a instrument drawn or written or made by the payer itself, and there should not be any condition attached to the promissory note. So this should be an unconditional and signed by the maker. That's a basic difference between the bills of exchange and the promissory note. Okay, as I inform you about some of the feature mentioned in the Negotiable Instrument Act for the bills of exchange, the similar kind of feature is also there for the promissory note. So we'll talk about the different features or the important features of the promissory note. First of all, it must be in writing. Again, it must be in writing. It must contain an unconditional promise to pay. So in the bills of exchange, there was an unconditional order to pay, but here it is an unconditional promise to pay. The sum payable must be certain. It should not be uncertain amount, right? So it must be signed by the maker. It should be signed by the maker. It must be payable to a certain person. It should be properly stamped. A promissory note does not require any acceptance because the maker of the promissory note himself promised to make the payment. So in the bills of exchange, the acceptance from the drawee is a prerequisite requirement, but in the promissory note, no acceptance is required, because the maker or the person who need to pay himself is drawing this bill, this promissory note, and he is making a promise that he will make a payment to a certain person on a given date. For the certain sum of money. Yeah. Okay. Now the parties to a promissory note. Again, as there were certain parties involved in the bills of exchange transaction, there is certain parties involved in the promissory note also. So we'll talk about that. So basically, maker or drawer is a person who promises to pay a certain sum of money to a certain person on a given date. Okay. Likewise, drawee or payee. Drawee or payee is basically a promisee who will be receiving the money. Yeah. And the pay is different in situation of discounting. Example, if the bills is discounted with bank, the pay must the pay will be different. Yeah, because in that case the bank would be a pay. I will talk about the discounting, what is discounting, in a later part of the slide. The drawer and payee cannot be the same person. So because the drawer is a person who is promising the payment, and the drawee or the payee is the person who is receiving the payment. So in this case, the drawer and payee cannot be the same person. But in the earlier bills of exchange, the drawer and the payee can be the same person, because the drawer is drawing the bill on the other person to pay a certain sum of money on a certain given date. Yeah, so basically earlier it was an order, now it is a promise. Okay. So in the bills of exchange, there are certain terms which is very important to understand. So first of all, what is maturity of bill? So basically the term maturity refers to the date on which a bills of exchange or a promissory note become due for payment. In arriving at the maturity date, 3 days known as date of grace must be added to the date on which the period of credit expires. So, for example, if a seller is drawing a bills of exchange for a 30 days from a given date, then the due date would be 30 plus 3, because 3 days are to be added as a grace period. Yeah, so it will fall due after 30 days from the date of the drawing plus 3 days of the grace period. um, there are certain important aspects which we need to understand. Where the date of maturity is a public holiday, where the date of maturity is a public holiday, it's a public holiday. You just remember this, it should be a public holiday. The instrument will become due on the preceding business day, but when an emergency holiday is declared under the Negotiable Instrument Act 1881 by the Government of India, which happens to be the date of the maturity of the bills of exchange, then the date of maturity will be the next working day immediately after the holiday. So for example, if I am issuing some bills of exchange to another person and the due date falls on a public holiday, then the due date would be one day preceding the public holiday. Yeah, preceding means previous to that date. Okay, and if I'm issuing bills of exchange on a certain person, and the due date is falling on certain date, and later on government declare a emergency holiday on that particular day, then the bills will get due immediately after that holiday. Yeah. Okay. The next important term is discounting of bill. What is discounting of bill? If the holder of bill needs fund, he can approach the bank for exchange for encashment of the bill before the due date. The bank shall make the payment of the bill after deducting some interest, called a discounting in this case. This process of encashing the bill with the bank is called discounting the bill. The bank gets amount from the drawee on the due date. So for example, if I am a seller, okay, I am selling a certain goods and I am drawing a bills of exchange on a purchaser of my goods, and the bill will get due on 3 months period. Like from today, it will get due on 3 months. But it might be a situation where I would need a fund before 3 months period. So what I'll do is I'll approach my banker and I will discount that bill with the bank. Bank, what will do is bank will pay the money to my bank account and deduct certain charges which we call the discounting charges, right? And the money will be in my bank account, and bank will be the drawee of the bill once it get discounted by the original drawer. and then on a due date after 3 months period, the bank will collect the amount from the drawee, sorry, from the drawee, and then the transaction will get complete. Okay. What is endorsement of bill? Endorsement is basically any holder may transfer a bill unless its transfer is restricted. That is, the bill has been negotiated containing words prohibiting its transfer. So if there is no prohibition attached to the bills of exchange, it can be transferred to another person. It can be endorsed to another person. Endorsement is basically a transfer of the bill to another person. The bill can be initially endorsed by drawer by putting his signature at the back of the bill along with the name of the party to whom it is being transferred. The act of signing and transferring the bill is called endorsement. So for example, again in my earlier example, if I am selling a goods to someone, and I am drawing a bills of exchange on a purchaser, right? And what I can do is I can transfer this bill to another person. So for example, if I'm transferring the bill to my friend, and I'm asking my friend that please pay to me, and I will transfer this bill to you, and you can take the money on the due date from the drawee. So so this transfer of the bills of exchange is basically called as an endorsement of bill. So with this ends the presentation of bills of exchange. I hope you would like this video. Thank you. Thank you very much.